Welcome back to the program. It's the Vicki McKenna Show, and I have Will Flanders from the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty on the program to talk about a few different things. Number one is the lawsuit that was filed claiming that we need infinity as the amount of money for education spending in Wisconsin. There's a lawsuit that is claiming we're underfunding education. And at the same time, I also noticed that Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty put out its classic apples to apples report. So, Will, thanks for jumping on the program. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
So here's the first claim that I would like to address. And I think people don't quite understand the impact of this. They're suing to say that the reason why there's terrible outcomes in education, which they never even admit to, is because we don't spend enough money. We don't spend enough money, and therefore we have 37% proficiency, even though, of course, we want to pretend we have higher proficiency than that. So let's start with that claim, and then we'll get to apples. And this really is about defunding school choice and making school funding for K-12 infinity.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In the context of these briefs that have been filed for this lawsuit, is the only time I have ever seen public school districts admit that their proficiency is pretty low, but they're not, offering any solutions. There's nothing specific in here as to how to fix it. The only argument is that more money is needed. And when you look at these 5 school districts, they're not low-funded school districts, potentially with the exception of Beloit. Beloit is a little bit on the lower end, but Green Bay, that's part of this lawsuit, is at $19,600 per kid. Adams Friendship is at $19,500. All of them are above $16,000 per student. So the idea that you can't educate students for more than $16,000 per student is absurd. Wisconsin is, in the upper half of states in terms of school funding, and there are plenty of examples of states out there that are getting out better outcomes for a lot lower cost.
So let's start with Mississippi, because they're one of them. They spend statewide average of, I think, right around $13,000 to $14,000 per student, and they are now leading the country in reading proficiency, or at least they're in the top 2 or 3 in reading proficiency.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You look at a state like Mississippi, and they become known for implementing the science of reading, going back to basics. And when you look at their student population, they're a heavily African-American state. They're a much poorer state than Wisconsin. They have a group of students that you would expect to struggle mightily, and yet they're spending less money and getting better outcomes. So there's no better example than that of the fact that more money is not the problem. And if you look in Wisconsin, if you look at the relationship between spending and student outcomes, it's actually a negative slope. We spend more money in the districts that get worse outcomes than we do in the districts that get better outcomes on average. So
yeah, Milwaukee.
No basis in reality for this.
Let's look at Milwaukee. Milwaukee, the worst outcomes in the state of Wisconsin, and we spend somewhere around $18,000 per student so that most of them can fail?
With the referendum, we're getting up to about $26,000 per kid in Milwaukee.
So $26,000.
If money is the answer.
You can send 2 kids to good private schools for that. $26,000 so that 8% of black kids in Milwaukee can read or do math at grade level?
It's absurd. You can have half of a college education in some places for that. So, yeah, and if money is the answer, then Milwaukee ought to be blowing this out of the water with their education outcomes in the next couple of years. But guess what? I don't think that's going to be the case.
Right. Let's go back to Mississippi, because most of the kids we're talking about, this is a disproportionate number of poor kids, black kids, kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, kids who have never caught up in reading proficiency. Now they're catching up, and they're spending right around $13,000, $14,000 per student to do it there. But in Wisconsin, this lawsuit says we're just not spending enough money. Money. And they're claiming we are diverting money from the parental school choice program in Wisconsin as well, where we spend far less per voucher to get better outcomes, which brings us to your apples to apples report.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to, see within Wisconsin that we can do more with less, the apples to apples report shows once again, as we found in sort of every year that we've done this analysis, that our choice and charter programs are getting better outcomes for less taxpayer money. There's higher proficiency on the forward exam in choice and charter schools on average for several $1,000s less per student. There has been an increase in funding in the last couple of years to get closer to parity, but there's still about a $3,000 to $4,000 gap, and the outcomes are better. And just like we were talking about with Mississippi, these aren't wealthy kids that are being educated. These are kids in the statewide program, family income under 220% of the federal poverty limit. In Milwaukee and Racine, under 300% of the federal poverty limit. So we're dealing with kids that come from more struggling backgrounds, and yet we're getting better results with these kids.
For thousands less per student, But this is about a backdoor dismantling of the parental voucher program, and it's about demanding that there is no constraint on school funding. And at least we get them to admit that proficiency stinks because they lie about it every other chance they get, except in this lawsuit. But let's go over a few other things. So in K-12, traditional K-12, we have fewer students. There are fewer and fewer and fewer students. And we have a 400-year property tax veto from Tony Evers that means every individual school district has the authority to add $325 per student cumulative every year for 400 years. And let me explain that again. If it's $325 this year, it's $650 next year, it's $975 the year after that, and on for 400 years. Obviously, money does not seem to be the problem here, Will.
Yeah, by the late 2030s, the 300-year veto will replace all of the state funding currently in education. It'll essentially have doubled it. So it sounds like a small amount, maybe on a yearly basis, but year over year, every single year that's going up is going to make a huge difference. And you're absolutely right. We have declining enrollment in the state. We've gone from 860,000 kids in 2016 to under 800,000 kids today. So if we just keep funding flat, if the state puts the exact same amount of money every single year, maybe with an inflation adjustment, then spending per kid is going to go up over time. So to make the argument the state isn't making enough effort in public education spending is absurd. They put the same amount of money in, the number of kids keeps going down. The spending per pupil from the state keeps going up.
Here's the thing. Spending per kid, that's pretend, because this doesn't go to the kids. $26,000, if $26,000 per kid went to the kids in Milwaukee and was targeted to the kids in Milwaukee, a lot of those kids would be able to read by now. But that money isn't going for the kids. Where is it going?
Yeah, ask the teachers in Milwaukee or any district around the state if they're getting that $18,000 per kid, right? We have $300,000 of value sitting in many classrooms, and it's not going to teachers. It's going to administrative staff. It's going to layer upon layer of bureaucracy. It's not reaching those that actually impact students directly. And it's instructive in the lawsuit there. They mentioned at one point that, well, when kids leave, our costs don't actually change. But the reality is that maybe when a few kids leave, the costs don't change. But over time, a meaningful amount of kids are leaving, and adjustments have to be made to budgets to reflect that reality, just like they'd have to be made in any private business out there if the number of customers changes.
No. See, we don't want to do anything to consolidate schools. We don't want to do anything to reduce costs. And 60,000 kids leaving in 10 years, that's not one or two. That's a lot of kids over 10 years. And if you look at, you project that out back 20 years, it's even greater. We are spending more not on kids. We are spending more on programs. We are spending more on administrators. We are spending more on social emotional learning. We are spending more on woking kids in Wisconsin schools. Has anybody audited all of this to say, this layer? But see, I think the answer to that is basically no, because we don't even expect schools to do proper budgets. They produce dollars in, dollars out documents that are not even proper budgets. So I don't even know if these school districts know where their money is going.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's very much a black box.
Yes.
You look at DPI's website and you can see, you can see categories of what every employee is, but you can't see whether that employee is focused on DEI, whether that employee is focused on the social emotional learning stuff without doing a really deep dive, doing open records requests. We've done some of that. Some of the other state organizations have done that, but it's a huge, immense problem, and it's tough to sort of pull all the threads and see what's under the surface.
Right. You can't get it at DPI. You got to go district to district. How many districts are there in Wisconsin? It's the same.
422, yeah.
Yeah, 422. 400. So you're going to have to do 422 deep dive audits as an independent organization like Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, because we do not empower that information to be shared with the legislature, nor, frankly, does the legislature ever ask for it. famously before Bill Osmulski moved on from McIver Institute, he was the first person to actually present a spreadsheet with specific information about education spending and the state budget to the legislature. Not that they did anything with it. So we have no idea. We don't know. We don't know if vendor contracts are scams. We don't know if the best bang for the buck is being squeezed out for, with services that are paid for outside the actual school buildings and districts themselves, do we?
We absolutely don't know. And it's the districts are not incentivized to create a better bang for the buck. They're not incentivized to be sort of governed by creating better student outcomes. So, one thing we should look at from a legislative perspective is carrots and sticks. Reward districts that are doing a better job with more funding. So there's actually an incentive towards proficiency. What this lawsuit asks for is just throw more money at the problem and expect a different outcome. If we want to think about things that might actually work, then you want more money, then actually show us that you're doing something to actively work towards higher student outcomes. Because obviously we're seeing the opposite around the state with reading proficiency, with math proficiency declining everywhere. Everywhere.
Now, what is the status of the implementation of the $50 million investment that the legislature made a couple of years ago in trying to improve reading outcomes in Wisconsin? Last I saw, you had a significant number of districts that were not even providing information on how they were implementing that program.
Yeah, that's right. There's a big dragging of the feet across the board with that. Obviously, the excuse was that it was tied up in a lawsuit for a while. That's over, but it's not clear that districts are, in general, there may be exceptions, moving forward pretty strongly in the implementation here. And again, it's because it sort of breaks that bureaucratic inertia. They just want to keep doing what they're doing, not make any changes, and radically or revolutionizing and going in a backwards way, but going to a science of reading-based curriculum doesn't align with their overall goals of keeping the status quo.
Right.
So that's a challenge to get them to do it.
Yeah. I mean, success actually isn't part of the goal of education, not if you're talking about from inside the institutions. How hard is it to teach kids to read when my mother, barely, in fact, she didn't graduate from high school, was able to teach me to read when I was a young girl. Nothing special about that. She taught my brother as well, right? How hard is it to actually just teach kids to read? It becomes harder when you create a curriculum that doesn't permit teachers to do what's necessary to teach kids to read in the first place. And we can't even get that done. And there's $50 million. Not to mention DPI has attempted to make that $50 million earmarked for everything except direct instructional support for teachers and in changing the mechanisms that they are addressing kids regarding reading comprehension, reading attention. So it's just, we throw money at this. We've been throwing money at education. There are fewer kids. Kids are worse off. I don't know what it's going to take, Will, but something tells me this lawsuit's going to make it to the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
I would think that's the case. And I would say, if there's one silver lining here, maybe it'll finally get us to pay attention to how much money we're actually spending on schools and, make the case that more money will actually matter, because there is no case to be made and they can't tell you what number would actually get it done.
Yeah. What's the number? How much you need? Oh, there's no upper limit to how much you're desperately needing here. Will Flanders, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. And by the way, folks, you can check out that Apples to Apples report. It's yearly. This compares the alternatives to traditional K-12 with K-12 in an apples to apples comparison using appropriate statistics. And it shows, once again, school choice FTW. Thanks so much for joining me, Will.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.